Hey guys, welcome to Hot Topic Tuesday. Trish and April here. And last week, we wrapped up our month on hormones. And in the last week, we wanted to just touch on the adrenals and cortisol, as those are hormones in our body, and very important. So today, we just wanted to kind of quickly recap that from last week. So we're going to be talking about adrenals and cortisol basics and function in the body. And then, if you've seen already, we're moving into thyroid health for the rest of this month. So stay tuned for that. But I'm going to get it started and talk about cortisol. And then April's going to take it over and talk about adrenals. So, cortisol, we have all heard of cortisol. It kind of gets a little bit of a bad rap, even though it's a great hormone that our body needs. I kind of refer to it as like our readiness hormone. We wake up, cortisol's a little bit spiky, we're kind of ready to go, ready to get out of bed. It's also referred to as our stress hormone, though, and that's where it gets probably a little bit more negative, talk about it. But it is released in response to stress and low blood glucose levels. It's produced by the adrenal glands, and it plays a vital role in various body functions. So, in times of stress, what happens is cortisol will help mobilize glucose in the body. It also suppresses kind of like those non functioning things. Like if you're very stressed out, your digestion is going to be suppressed, reproductive processes are going to be stressed. This is why, in times way back in the day when it was very stressful situations, there probably wasn't a lot of, procreation happening. There was just too much stress going on and not probably the right environment to bring a child into the world. So you'll definitely have some of those systems suppressed when cortisol's really high in response to stress. Chronic stress can lead to dysregulation of cortisol levels. That can lead to the symptoms that we hear about. So weight gain, fatigue, immune suppression. So people get sick a lot, and mood disorders can be part of that one also. So functions of cortisol in the body, metabolism. So cortisol plays a crucial role in regulating metabolism. It definitely increases glucose metabolism as we've kind of talked about. So if you're constant stress and your body's kind of pushing out a lot of glucose and there's just nowhere really for that to go, then obviously we're going to have, some problems with that. It definitely helps maintain blood sugar regulation. It plays a part in protein metabolism. It helps break down fat, proteins, all of that kind of stuff. Um, so, the biggest thing is if you have a lot of cortisol in the body, then you're going to be having a lot of possibly excess glucose that your body isn't using, especially these days. Like in the past, millions of years ago, um, cortisol was released in stressful situations that usually required physical activity. So, fight, flight, those type of things. We actually can have a cortisol dump when we're just sitting here opening emails. So we're not necessarily like moving around in response to that stress. So we can see how that could be a problem if we're always releasing the glucose into the body. It's, just kind of hanging out there, but we're not really like using it in a physical situation. Stress response. So that's another function of cortisol. So cortisol is key component of the body's stress response system. In response to stressors such as physical or psychological stress, cortisol levels rise to help the body cope with those demands. It mobilizes energy, stores, enhances cardiovascular function, and suppresses non essential functions like digestion and reproduction temporarily. Thank goodness. That can all be reversed when there's not a big stressful situation. So, immune function is also another function of cortisol. So, cortisol has immunosuppressive effects that can help dampen inflammation and immune responses during times of stress. However, when it's chronic, the elevation of cortisol due to prolonged stress can weaken the immune system and make individuals more susceptible to illness and infection. So, and a lot of people notice that under big stressful situations, we see a lot more colds, we see a lot more illness, even kind of more planned physical stressors that have, more cortisol release, like training for a marathon or a race, we often see that those people will be okay maybe during training, but maybe when that training's over and that stressor's over, a lot of people will get sick after that. Okay, the last thing, cortisol has a function in our circadian rhythm regulation. We talk a lot about that here. Cortisol follows a diurnal pattern, meaning, it's elevated in the morning, and then it kind of curves off to um, decrease at night so that we can have good sleep. If we have a really, really high cortisol, it's kind of hard to get into a nice restful state. Levels peak in the morning to help wake us up. That's kind of that readiness hormone, and then they decline throughout the day. And this rhythm, this healthy cortisol curve, it's essential to kind of keep our circadian rhythm in a good healthy pattern, and it is essential to help a good restful sleep at night. So if you're noticing symptoms like wired but tired is how we like to say it, if you're trying to fall asleep but you feel very wired, you're tired, your body's tired, you may physically be exhausted, but your mind is just racing and you feel very wired at the same time. That likely can be a problem of cortisol still being a little bit out of range at night, or just that curve not kind of following that healthy pattern. So that's something to kind of look at and address. So if you have symptoms, again, like kind of more unexplained weight gain, that maybe you've had a big stressor, so that might make sense, or maybe you've had some chronic stress going on too. That tired but wired feeling at night, very, very low energy also in the morning. Like if you're not getting a good cortisol awakening response, you could feel pretty rough in the morning too. And blood sugar control issues, craving a lot of carbs, like that can happen also if we're always kind of pumping glucose into our or our blood stream, and insulin is having to kind of work a little bit extra. That actually can cause some hangry feelings, before you feel like you should be hungry. So April's going to kind of take it over. That's kind of a wrap for cortisol, and she's going to take over with adrenals.
So the adrenal glands, I will say cortisol is the more popular of these. It's like we're in high school. Cortisol is the more popular one that most people know about. But I would like to argue that the adrenal glands are more important. So it's kind of like the silent one in the background that kind of is a little bit more important than cortisol. But with that being said, the adrenal glands are the small triangular shaped glands located at the top of each kidney. Um, the adrenal glands consist of two main parts, the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. I mean, like that in itself just sounds like pretty important. But anyway, the adrenal cortex produces several hormones, including cortisol, which I think arguably makes it more important. Um, Aldosterone, and sex hormones. So it's kind of important in regards that it's responsible for the production of a lot of different hormones. The adrenal medulla produces adrenaline, which is also known as epinephrine, and noradrenaline, which is also known as norepinephrine, which are involved in our body's fight or flight response to stress. So again, it's a major stress hormone. Dysfunction of the adrenal glands can lead to various health issues, including adrenal insufficiency, Cushing's syndrome, which is typically excess cortisol production, and Addison's disease, which is adrenal gland failure. Now, the adrenal glands and hormone balance, how it plays a role. Aldosterone is produced in the adrenal cortex, and aldosterone it's responsible for regulating electrolyte balance by promoting sodium retention and potassium excretion into the kidneys. Imbalances in aldosterone levels can lead to electrolyte
Mhm.
abnormalities such as high blood pressure and fluid imbalances. So one of the signs of like HPA axis dysfunction is like retaining a lot of water, just overall electrolyte imbalance. Like you notice, like if you are say like if you're drinking a lot of water, you're drinking a lot of water and then just holding a lot of water, or you might be drinking a lot of water and sweating but still retaining a lot of water. That's usually an indicator. In regards to the sex hormones, the adrenal cortex produces small amounts of testosterone and estrogen, which obviously we had our estrogen talk a few weeks back on the importance of those. While the majority of our hormones are produced by the gonads, which is the ovaries in females, adrenal androgens contribute to overall hormone balance. Dysregulation of adrenal sex hormone production can affect reproductive health and overall libido. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, when estrogen is elevated or in some cases too low and progesterone is too high, it can affect, overall sex drive, libido, energy, the difficulty with losing weight or weight loss resistance. It just plays a major role in a lot of different systems, but you can almost always tell. Um, Adrenal androgens, such as DHEA, serve as precursors to testosterone and estrogen. They play a role in maintaining muscle mass, bone density, and overall vitality in the body. Dysregulation of adrenal androgens typically will impact mood, energy levels, and again libido. Um, I have to say real quick. I told Trish before I started that I was not going to go off on a tangent and start talking about whatever. But I do want to say one of my biggest complaints about adding supplements or adding hormones or things in. I recently had a consultation with a client who, it was a new client who had gotten started on hormone replacement therapy, and the doctor did no hormone test, like none, zero. There was no hormone testing that was done, and basically was given progesterone and also testosterone, and like I was just blown away. Like, it's so important, to
New doctor, red flag.
yes, it's so important to get the testing done to know exactly what and how much of things that you need. So it's common, like you've got these symptoms and you're like looking, but we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. A lot of these symptoms will cross over to each other. So you might be exhibiting symptoms that typically would be signs of excess estrogen, but it's actually low progesterone, or low testosterone. It just annoys me when the first answer is giving a female testosterone, like without knowing anything else. But
Oh,
that's
wait, one thing, I know we're not getting off in tangents, but another thing I was going to say with the testing, um, cortisol too. Like I know in the past, like we've thrown around ashwagandha a lot. And, I think years ago I would just say, oh, you're stressed. Oh, ashwagandha is great, KMS 66. But more recently, I've heard that like they have found ashwagandha is really good at lowering high cortisol. May not be great though if your cortisol is like in the dumpster. Like if you're
yes.
suffering more for low cortisol, like a rhodiola, or there's, a couple other things that might be better. So you could actually bring yourself into like more adrenal issues taking ashwagandha if you have low cortisol. So now more hesitation or maybe more questions, or it'd be awesome if somebody did, know where their cortisol was falling. But I've been careful, and I think you have too, about just like throwing ashwagandha at everything anymore.
Agree 100%. And the last piece specifically kind of ties into that, which would be hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the APA axis. And we've talked about this, mentioned this before in regards to HPA axis dysfunction. The adrenal glands are intricately connected to the hypothalamus and pituitary gland through the HPA axis. This regulates cortisol production in response to stress. Dysregulation of the HPA axis can disrupt cortisol levels, leading to imbalances in other hormones and contributing to symptoms such as adrenal fatigue or HPA axis dysfunction. But like what to piggyback what Trish was saying, when cortisol is kind of in the dumpster, the body's going to naturally start tapping into the adrenals. So the adrenals going to have to start taking over to step into that fight or flight, stress response, which is why it's so important to test on gas. Granted, I will say if you don't have your stress management practices, your lifestyle, your diet, if you don't have all those systems in place, go work on that first. But if you've got all of that on lock, and then you're like, I just feel like turd, like, can you help me? That is when I'm to be like, absolutely, we should do a Dutch test, or In some cases, there's other hormone testing. Trish and I both like the Dutch test because not only is it going to give us specifics in regards to the exact amounts of the hormones, but it's also going to tell us how you're utilizing estrogens. And but another thing that I really like about it is that it's going to piggyback what she was saying in regards to cortisol has a natural diurnal pattern. It's going to give us that 4-point cortisol curve. So it's going to show us, what is your cortisol doing? Like, is it high in the morning and tapering down like it's supposed to, or is it in the dumpster in the morning where you wake up feeling tired and then at night you can't go to sleep because you feel wired, because you have HPA axis dysfunction where cortisol is just completely flipped, where it's high at times it's not supposed to be. So again, if you don't have your lifestyle and stress management practices, under lock, go do that first. Get your diet in order, meaning, if you're eating a bunch of processed crap, eating copious amounts of sugar, not getting an adequate amount of protein, not getting an adequate amount of fiber and veggies, go work on that first. Reduce overall stress in your life. And we've said this before, we're never, ever, ever going to have a life without stress. It's just a matter of how are we managing that stress and how are we balancing that stress. We can't do without stress. I think life will probably be born without stress. We can't do without that, but it's how are we properly managing that? Do we have self-care playing in? Like, are we doing things to fill our own cup? Like, what are we doing to do that? And then if you have all those things under control and you still feel like turd, reach out. We can probably do some testing and find out exactly what's going on and then know exactly what we need to do. But when you have all those other things, like to kind of call them low hanging fruit, low hanging fruit that's just dangling in your face, let's work on that first because you could save yourself some time and some money, because, work on that and you might feel drastically better and go from there. So that being
Yeah.
said, y'all have a great week. And next week we are going to dive into all the goodness of the thyroid.